Hey there, it's Mark Percival with Formulated Automation. We're doing a screencast now. This is part 2 on debugging Robot Framework. So in the first screencast, we really just debugged using keywords from Robot Framework, and that was fairly simple, just allowing us to pause if there was a failure so we could look at what actually failed. In this case, we're going to go a little bit more in depth on using something like PDB and Python to actually really inspect what's happening and do more than just look after there's a failure, but maybe even set a breakpoint before there's a failure so we can kind of look and manipulate things as we see fit. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's see. First, I'll go over the basic understanding of the task we've written. Same task as in the first framework: open Bing, perform a search, look for our GitHub account, and then that's it. Close up the browser. Same thing. We're using a sweet teardown to tear down the scripts, and we're using that to close the browsers. And we also have a keyword here called pause on failure. And if you remember in the last screencast, we actually had this all written in Robot Framework code that was run that did the same thing, pause on failure, but it was all written in Robot Framework. In this case, we've actually written a little bit of custom Python here. And you can see pause on failure is now a keyword that we've written here. Most importantly, we're looking again to see if the sweet status is set to failed or fail. In this case, we know a task is failed, and then we continue on and we look and we ask a question, is this debug mode? If it is debug mode and it's failed, then we will go ahead and import the required libraries, which is the dialog library, and then we will run pause execution. And that's the same thing we were doing in the last screencast. We're just doing that in Python land. Now, the important thing here is set breakpoint is the more interesting piece of this. Now, set breakpoint happens if you call the keyword set breakpoint. It actually tests again, are we in debug mode? If we're in debug mode, then we set the trace with PDB, and that will drop us out to PDB and allow us to basically inspect what we want to inspect. We've also added a couple more things in here like print variables, and that allows us to look at all the built-in or the Robot Framework variables, and print envs, which is just looking at environment variables and printing those out. And again, if debug mode is set, really just looking at it from the standpoint of, is there a environment variable called robot debug? If it's set to true, then go ahead, and we are in debug mode, you can go ahead and pause or set a breakpoint. The idea here is that from a safety standpoint, if we have this in production and we've left a set breakpoint in production, this will not pause and hold up the world on our script running. In production, you would want it to fail in a way that allows a script behind it to run, or basically not to just hang open. So that's the goal here with is debug mode. So let's go back to the browser script, and we'll go ahead and look at the task here. Again, open Bing, perform search here. This is all correct. In this case, this one isn't going to break, but we actually set the breakpoint here before we do an input into the field, in the search field. So let's run this, and we'll show how that can be useful. So again, environment variable, robot debug equals true. We're running the robot command then. Here we go. Browser opens up. We get Bing. Now, it's not entered anything into the search box because if we go back here, we will see we are in PDB. So now we're paused, and we're in Python debug. Now, a couple things to note here. I have a couple options at my disposal. Built-in is actually basically Robot Framework's instance and allows me to run commands on Robot Framework just as if I was in Robot Framework essentially, but these commands are the Python version. So built-in, let's do get variable value query. Now, if you were in Robot Framework land, this would be get space variable space value, and then you would pass in query. In this case, we're doing it from Python. Let's run that. And we see exactly what we'd expect, which is formulated automation GitHub. We saw that was passed in as an argument. Let's go back down here and validate that. And there it is, formulated automation GitHub. But let's say we want to change that. So we're going to run the command set local variable query to UiPath. Same thing here. This is a Robot Framework command, keyword set space local space variable, but we're running it from Python directly. So this is just the function set underscore local underscore variable. We're passing in the query variable here inside the curly brackets and the $, and we're passing in the value we want to set it to. So we hit that, and now that variable set, and we can validate. You can verify that by doing this. Now we see it's set to UiPath. Now, if I was to hit continue here, and in PDB land, that's just, you can just use the shorthand C. If I hit C and hit enter, we can see this happen in the browser. So let's do that. It should be searching for UiPath now. we'll hit enter, go to the browser, and now you can see I've gone ahead and manually paused it with another right after that with the pause for debug. So we have that dialog there stopping the rest of the execution. But you can see that we have UiPath is actually now the query. So we've actually changed that variable before it went into this next search task, and now we have pause for debug. Let's look back at the code just to validate exactly that is what we expected to have happen. Set breakpoint, input name the query. Remember, we changed it right there. Submit form, we did that, and then pause for debug. This one I put in there just so we can make sure before we close the browser that it actually did what I expected it to do. So going back here, clearly that's what happened. Now, the next step is I've got this pause for debug. I'm going to hit OK here, and it should close out the task and run all the teardown scripts. And we see it passed. And we're good. So we had the task pass. We modified something in flight, basically, before we went and did the search. And so this is an example of we dropped to Python, PDBs, interactive debugger. We changed something in robot framework and the script, or we inspected it first, and then we changed it. And then we saw it actually get used in the script later on for searching. So this is a case where, if you were debugging robot framework and you really wanted to dig into maybe, you're not sure why a variable is being set some way, or, is there... if you need to change something to experiment, this is a good strategy to do that. Again, this is all being done from Python, so this does require the library to be loaded. It's pretty simple. If you go up here, you see, hey, we're just loading the debug library. This is all in GitHub. You could include this into your library if you wanted. It's a fairly simple script if you have any background in Python. This is pretty easy to figure out what's going on. We just have a few keywords here: set breakpoint, pause on failure. In that case, we're using it just here in the teardown, just like before in the screencast prior to this. We have pause for debug. This is just manually pausing for debug. And then we have some helpers here, print variables. This lets us get all the variables that are in Robot Framework. This is useful if you want to drop to PDB and say, hey, I just want to know what all the variables are set to. This will just print them out into your screen. And remember, this would be called as self._print variables, because when you set trace here, up here, and to set breakpoint, up there we go. Set trace. You're actually you're basically, this is the position you've stopped in, and so you have access to all of these functions now. So this is an example of where you could write some custom functions here to help yourself basically debug. If you had some particular task you wanted to run and you didn't want to have to keep typing it into PDB over and over again, this is a place where you could write some very quick script and say, okay, I want the following fairly complicated set of actions to take place while I'm debugging this. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. This is on GitHub. You can find this project on GitHub. You can copy this library out of there and use it in your own libraries. And feel free to follow up with any questions about this. We're just hello@formulated.ai. Thanks.